At our family's New Year's Eve dinner on December 31st, my dad stood up with his glass raised, already half drunk, and looked straight at me. Hey everyone, let's toast to the new year. And Claire, when are you finally going to own a beach house like your sister? Or are you planning to rent forever? The whole table of 20 people burst out laughing. Victoria smirked and flicked her hair. I set my glass down slowly and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, actually, she doesn't own that beach house the way you think she does. Dead silence. My dad froze mid-sip. Victoria's face went white as paper. That was the first time in 28 years I saw my father completely speechless. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community. The silence at that table wasn't just quiet. It was an accounting error. Finally coming to light. Gary froze, his half-drunk glass trembling in his hand as his face shifted from a boozy, contractor red to a ghostly, sickly white. Beside him, my mother, Melissa, looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. For 28 years, I had been the silent footnote in the grand story of Brand Victoria. My sister was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the shadow, built to make her shine brighter. I sat there, calm and methodical, watching the gears turn in their heads. They weren't shocked by what they'd done to me over the years. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Growing up in our house meant learning a very specific hierarchy. Victoria always got the designer labels, the new iPhones, and the monogrammed bedding. I got her hand-me-downs and a constant lecture on the virtues of being sensible. Our kitchen always carried the scent of this favoritism. It smelt like the expensive lavender oil Victoria used for her spa days, mixed with the sharp, acidic smell of the floor cleaner I used when I worked 3 jobs just to survive college. My father, Gary, always told me I was the dependable one. In his language, that was a polite way of saying I was useful, but uninspired. He assumed I was still scraping by in some cramped studio apartment, barely making enough to pay my rent. He and Melissa even used to press $20 bills into my palm for gas, looking at me with that patronizing pity they reserved for their less successful daughter. They didn't know that while Victoria was busy building a fake career as a branding expert, I was mastering the world of quantitative finance. I'm a quantitative analyst. I deal in risk, probability, and hard, cold facts. By the time I turned 26, I wasn't just getting by. I was earning $350,000 a year. I lied to them about my income for 2 simple reasons. First, I knew that the moment they saw my bank balance, the requests for loans would start money to save Victoria's failing business or to pay for another lavish family party. Second, I didn't want to give Gary the satisfaction of another comparison. I could already hear him saying that I'd finally figured it out because of the character he allegedly built in me. So, I maintained the camouflage. I drove a beat-up silver hybrid and wore the same 3 hoodies whenever I visited. Meanwhile, I was quietly building a different kind of life. I used the irrevocable trust my grandmother, Eleanor, left me to acquire real power. In the winter of 2021, I bought that beach house in the Hamptons for $4,200,000. I did it through a private family office, ensuring my name never touched a single public record. I was the landlord. Victoria was the tenant, who thought she'd scammed her way into a high-end life. And now, she was more than $115,000 in the hole. Well, Victoria, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the dining room, the balance sheet for your perfect life is finally due. Buying that house in the Hamptons wasn't an impulse. It was a strategic acquisition. While my sister Victoria was busy buying followers and renting designer handbags to maintain her brand, I was looking for distressed assets. In 2021, the market shifted. A specific property landed in my alerts. A contemporary glass and steel fortress on the shoreline, with $4,200,000 written all over it. The owner needed out before the new tax year, and I was ready. With 40% down in certified funds, I didn't use my name. I used the Eleanor Trust. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only one who saw my potential, while I was still just the shadow in the Reeves household. She left me her entire estate in a way that ensured Gary and Melissa couldn't touch a penny of it. To the Suffolk County tax rolls, the owner was an anonymous entity. To the neighbours, I was a ghost. To my family, I was still the daughter driving a beat-up silver hybrid and complaining about the rising cost of utilities. Sometimes people ask why I didn't just walk away the moment I hit my first six-figure bonus. They don't understand the invisible chain of a survivor. Growing up in an environment of extreme favoritism isn't just about losing out on gifts. It's about a psychological house arrest. You learn to stay quiet. You learn to stay small. You learn that any display of strength is an invitation for an attack. It was a prison without bars. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a tactical retreat. I stayed in the shadows because shadows are the perfect place to build an empire without interruption. Every time Gary called me sensible or boring, it was a confirmation that my camouflage was working. He saw a daughter who had failed to launch. I saw a balance sheet that was tilting heavily in my favor. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you realize the people who are supposed to protect you are actually your competitors. I treated my relationship with them like a long-term hedge. I invested just enough emotional capital to keep them from getting suspicious, while I moved my real assets into safe havens they could never find. When Victoria asked our real estate manager about the rental listing for the beach house, she thought she'd found a jewel to reflect her elevated living. She didn't know the jewel already belonged to me. I approved her application myself. I wanted her in that house. I wanted her to feel the comfort of the white oak floors I had paid cash to install. I wanted her to get used to the view of the ocean that she thought she had earned, because I knew that when the time came, the fall from those floor-to-ceiling windows would be much more satisfying than if she were just falling from a rented townhouse. This wasn't a family dynamic anymore. It was a business transaction, and Victoria was about to realize that her credit with me had been permanently revoked. Victoria was 32 years old and still living in a fantasy world she could no longer subsidize. She had spent the last year playing the role of a Hamptons socialite, posting drone footage of my dock and mirror selfies in my master bathroom. Every caption screamed ownership. Grateful for my home every single day, she wrote. This view is mine forever. It was a masterpiece of deception, but I was the one holding the receipts. My sister had successfully convinced the world and our parents that she was the queen of the coast, while the actual bill for her life was gathering dust on my digital dashboard. Lydia Brooks, the property manager who believed she was working for a discreet family office, sent me quarterly inspection reports that grew increasingly grim. Victoria was no longer just a few days late on payment. She had become a financial black hole. The total balance due had climbed past $115,000. But if you looked at her Instagram, you'd see red cup parties on the rooftop terrace and empty bottles of expensive champagne littering the quartzite island. I'd paid cash to install. She was trashing a $4,200,000 asset while pretending she sat on a throne of her own making. This is the trap of the empty wallet, a psychological phenomenon where the illusion of power is used to mask an internal vacuum. People like Victoria confuse having with being. In her mind, the physical act of occupying a mansion made her important, regardless of the fact that she was effectively a squatter. She believed her status was inherent when it was actually just a layer of paint she had rented and refused to pay for. Her power was a facade, a borrowed glory that was only as strong as my willingness to remain silent. When you build your identity on assets you don't own, you're not an owner. You're just a guest who has overstayed their welcome. My parents were equally intoxicated by this counterfeit success. Gary and Melissa spent their weekends at the house, holding court with their friends and acting like they had raised a titan of industry. They sat on my European white oak floors and looked through my retractable glass walls, feeling superior while they looked down on my boring career. It was a collective delusion, a high-stakes performance where the leads had forgotten they were on a stage. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was analytical. I sat in my small apartment, scrolling through the photos of the damage to my property. I didn't cry. I didn't reach out to ask why she was doing this. I just opened my legal folder and started organizing the evidence. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 28 years. Now, I realized that love had been a high-interest loan they had defaulted on long ago. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was accounting. And I was about to audit their entire existence. The phone call from Gary came less than 48 hours after the New Year's Eve dinner. I sat at my desk, watching the recording software pulse on my second monitor as I hit accept. His voice wasn't apologetic. It was frantic, layered with that aggressive entitlement he used whenever a project went over budget. "Claire, we need to talk about your sister," he said, skipping the greeting. "Victoria's branding firm is facing a temporary liquidity crisis. We need $50,000 by Friday to keep the creditors at bay." I didn't interrupt. I just listened to the sound of a bad investment trying to double down. My silence seemed to embolden him. "Look, I know things were tense at dinner, but family is family," he continued, his tone shifting into a low, threatening growl. "If you don't step up and help your sister now, don't expect a single dime from the family estate. I will have the lawyer strike your name off the will before the sun goes down." I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a feeling of betrayal, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a parent speaking to a daughter. It was a desperate debtor trying to squeeze a final payment out of a closed account. They hadn't even realized that the family estate he was using as leverage was a ghost. There was no inheritance waiting for me. There was only the debt they were trying to transfer onto my shoulders. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I looked at it while Gary was still ranting about loyalty. "Face it, Claire," she wrote. "You're useless to this family if you aren't providing value. You owe us your existence. Send the money or stay in the shadows where you belong." I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't even feel a spike in my heart rate. I simply watched the audio waves of Gary's voice being captured on my screen. This was evidence. This was documentation of attempted coercion. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 28 years. But today, I was calling in the debt. "I've heard you, Dad," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "I'll have my representative reach out to you." I hung up before he could ask what that meant. Within 10 minutes, I'd forwarded the recording and the screenshots to my legal team. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff. My attorney, a sharp woman who specialized in asset protection and trust litigation, didn't sound surprised when she reviewed the files. "The civil suit for the $115,000 in back rent is already drafted," she said. "But these threats change the nature of the conversation. They're providing us with all the leverage we need for a forced eviction and asset seizure." I went back to my quantitative models, the numbers on the screen glowing, with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts and quiet retribution. Victoria thought she was a brand. Gary thought he was a king. They were about to find out that when you stop paying the premium, the coverage disappears. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. And I was finally closing the books. The legal battle for $115,000 in back rent was just the opening act. 3 days after Gary's threatening phone call, my attorney called me back with a voice that had lost its professional detachment. We had found a crack in Victoria's facade that went deeper than missed payments. While investigating the property's inventory for the civil suit, we discovered that several high-value assets were missing from the mansion. My sister wasn't just living in my house for free. She was harvesting it. We found the listings on a high-end private auction site, a mid-century mahogany sideboard, an original oil painting from the 1920s, and a set of hand-carved emerald inlaid chairs. These weren't just furniture. They were the heart of the Eleanor Trust, part of the legacy my grandmother had specifically entrusted to me. Victoria had already moved $42,000 worth of heirlooms, and she had another $60,000 worth of antiques scheduled for pickup by an appraiser the following morning. As I stared at the auction photos, a memory surfaced, a mini flashback to a rainy afternoon when I was 12. Grandma Eleanor had sat me down in that very house, her hands smelling of old paper and peppermint. She had pointed to the mahogany sideboard and whispered, "Claire, these things aren't just wood and fabric. They carry the stories of the women who came before us. They hold the family's soul. Promise me you'll keep them safe, even when the world tries to take them." Back then, I had believed her. I had believed that history mattered. But looking at the sold digital stamp next to our grandmother's favourite painting, the last remnants of my familial sentimentality turned to ash. Victoria wasn't just a golden child who had lost her way. She was a predator. She had taken a grieving woman's legacy and sold it off to fund her failing brand and her designer lifestyle. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. By selling assets that belonged to an irrevocable trust she didn't own, Victoria had crossed the line from a civil debt to a criminal act of grand larceny and trust fraud. I didn't scream. I didn't call my mother to cry about the betrayal. I felt a cold, sharp finality settle in my chest. For 28 years, I had accepted being the shadow, thinking that if I just worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough, I could eventually earn a seat at their table. But you can't negotiate with people who see you as a resource to be mined. File the criminal complaint, I told my lawyer. Notify the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department. I want the warrant served at the house tomorrow during her branding mixer. I closed my laptop and looked at the sapphire ring on my desk, a different heirloom I had bought for myself with my own earnings. My grandmother was right about one thing. The family soul was worth protecting. But it wasn't in the furniture anymore. It was in the person who had the strength to finally close the door on the people who tried to steal it. There would be no more apologies, no more second chances. The audit was over, and the judgment was about to begin. The mansion at 7:30 p.m. was exactly what Victoria wanted the world to see. A shimmering monument to a life she hadn't earned. The driveway was choked with luxury vehicles, and through the glass walls, I could see the glitter of 100 shallow conversations. Victoria was in the centre of the quartzite island, her electric laugh ringing out as she played the part of the gracious owner. She was wearing a silk dress that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front doors, accompanied by 2 deputies from the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department. The branding mixer died a sudden, clinical death as the music stopped. Every influencer and business partner Victoria had spent months courting turned to stare. Claire? Victoria's voice was high and brittle, the facade of the golden child cracking in real time. What are you doing? I told you we were busy tonight. You're embarrassing me. Gary marched forward, his face cycling into a dangerous, dark red. I gave you a choice, Claire. I told you to stay in your lane or be cut out of this family. I didn't answer them. I simply pulled my tablet from my bag and turned the screen so the entire room could see the red overdue balance. Actually, Gary, you don't have the power to cut me out of anything, I said, my voice cold and lethal. This mansion is owned by the Eleanor Trust, and I am the sole trustee. Victoria is not the owner. She is a tenant who is currently $115,000 delinquent in rent. And because you've been illegally selling off assets belonging to the trust, I have already secured an emergency eviction warrant. These deputies are here to enforce it immediately. You have 10 minutes to grab your essentials before you are escorted off the property. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I saw 5 phones immediately rise to record the meltdown, the viral within viral moment I knew would be the end of them. I swiped to the next document, a copy of the criminal warrant. And this is for the theft and unauthorized auctioning of the trust's antique furniture. This mixer is over. Victoria's knees hit the floor. Her designer heels skidded against the white oak she'd spent months bragging about. She looked up at me, her mascara running in thick, ugly lines. You're my sister, she choked out. How could you do this to me in front of everyone? Gary's bravado had evaporated. He looked broken, diminished, a contractor king with no crown. He reached out a shaking hand. Claire, please. She's your blood. Stop the deputies. Do something to help her. I looked down at the man who had called me a worthless burden, and the sister who had sold our grandmother's soul to pay for a lie. I handed the lead deputy the final copy of the eviction notice. I already did, I said. I'm helping this family face the one thing they've avoided for 28 years, the truth. I turned my back on the sobbing and the camera flashes, walking out into the cool ocean air without a single regret. I sold the beach house 3 weeks after the eviction. The Hamptons market was feverish, and I accepted an all-cash offer from a developer that closed in 15 days. After the mortgage and the fees were settled, the trust cleared a profit of $1,500,000. I didn't keep the money Victoria owed me. I took the full $115,000 and wired it to a local foundation for foster children suffering from abuse. I did it in Victoria's name. It would be the only legacy she would ever leave, a forced act of kindness funded by her own failure. The fallout for my biological family was absolute. Gary and Melissa were radioactive. Within a month, Gary's former colleagues stopped returning his calls. They were forced to sell their colonial home and move into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they used to mock. Victoria's branding firm went into receivership, and her husband filed for divorce the day the moving trucks arrived. They had built their lives on the illusion of power. And when my money stopped being the foundation, the entire structure turned to dust. I am now living in Austin, Texas. My new home is a penthouse loft overlooking the water, filled with light and actual silence, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of the Reeves household. I accepted a principal analyst role at a firm that values my expertise, not my obedience. My income is now $350,000 a year, and I no longer drive a beat-up hybrid to protect anyone's ego. I changed my phone number. I deactivated every account tied to my old life. I blocked every email and every social media handle they could possibly use. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I finally understood that letting go of a toxic family isn't a betrayal. It's an act of self-rescue. We are told that blood is thicker than water, as if that somehow justifies a lifetime of being treated like an invisible shadow. But sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is acknowledge that your parents were never your protectors. They were your first adversaries. I've learned that family isn't about DNA. Family is about who shows up, who respects your boundaries, and who sees your worth without a price tag attached. I spent 28 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was designed to keep me on the floor. Now, I have my own table. I have my own life. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I can breathe without waiting for the next comparison to steal the air from my lungs. I am not a shadow anymore. I am the light of my own future. Freedom is worth more than any apology they will never mean. True freedom is when you no longer need the approval of the people who worked so hard to make you feel small. If you see yourself in my journey, please remember that your voice matters, and you deserve to be seen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share this video to inspire others to reclaim their own narratives.